And, particularly to talk about freedom and the important aspects of freedom in our society. Interestingly enough, a lot of people have been saying to me, you need to be more animated, and you need to shout, and you need to make people pay attention, because that's the only way that they actually believe you. Well, I gotta tell you something. That scares children. As a pediatric neurosurgeon, I didn't want all my patients to be afraid. But it wasn't always like that. As many of you know, there was a time when I would fly off the handle, have horrible things happen because of that temper of mine. And, the wonderful thing is that God did such a good job of fixing it that people can't believe that I ever had a temper like that. That's a wonderful thing. It's wonderful. Because when God fixes a problem, he doesn't just do a paint job on the outside, he fixes it from the inside. He changes who you are. And the Bible says things like that the carnal mind cannot understand. And therefore, it seems like total foolishness that somebody could change. But I don't worry about things like that, because my favorite verse in the Bible, 2 verses, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not to your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. And he has done that. He will continue to do that. And I think he wants to do that for our nation. But do you ever stop and think how fortunate you are to live in the United States of America? There are a lot of people who like to denigrate us and say that we're responsible for so many wrongs in the world. But have you noticed there's a lot of people trying to get in here and not a lot of people trying to get out of here? So that should tell you something about what a wonderful place it is. But last week this time, I was in Jordan, and I wanted to actually go over there and talk to the Syrians, because first of all, people said to me, are you sure you want to do that? Because you call the Syrians dogs, so they'll be mad at you. But you know what? It was only the media here they knew exactly what I was talking about, that the terrorists were like rabid dogs. But in this country, it may be the media that's like rabid dogs. But anyway. We'll see what they do with that one. But But I wanted to talk to the Syrians themselves and ask them, what would you like to see happen? And I got a very consistent answer that they wanted to be resettled in their own country. They didn't want to come to America. There's a bunch of people here, and they always give you these false choices. They said it's either this or that. With the Iran deal, either we make this asinine deal or we go to war. Those weren't the only two options. And now they tell us with the Syrians, either we take tens of thousands of these people or we're hard-hearted, cold individuals. But the fact of the matter is, there's a third choice that is better than either of those. And that choice is to take care of them over there in safe areas. And that's what they want. And the only thing that's missing right now is the support for the Jordanians, who have a lot more capacity to take more people. But also you have to think about Syria itself. If you look at the northeastern section of that country, which is controlled by the Kurds, where there are airports and hotels and lots of land, though those people could be resettled there, I'm sure the Kurds would be very happy to have them as long as we provided them with the military assistance that they would need to do that. For some reason, we don't seem to trust the Kurds. We'll do something for this one period of time and then this period of time, but we don't trust them long term. And yet every time we have worked with them, it has turned out to be an excellent thing. And we need to understand that we can use them in a very effective way. You know, you think about Sinjar a few weeks ago and how they were able to take that. The Kurds were able to take that back from ISIS with our help, our special ops people who were implanted among them, and they were able to squeeze off all the supply routes to soften the city. And then when they were ready to go in with our air support, it was a relatively easy thing to do. Those are the kinds of things that we should be thinking about. If we really want to take care of our people over here, we need to get rid of them over there. And the way that we do that is very systematically. We look at the things that work. That was a model that works. We can do the same thing with Raqqa. You know, their capital, their command central. It only has 4 major routes into it. We can control those, squeeze those off, make it untenable for them to be able to live there, kill them as they try to escape. The ones that do escape and they go somewhere else and form another capital, we find that, we go there, we do the same thing to them. We have them on the run all the time. They won't have time to be doing stuff over here. That's what we have to think about. And we need to shut off all of their monetary supplies, because what they do is they target you know, the disaffected individuals, not only in the Middle East, but all over the world. And they say, we can give you a better life. And it's true, they can give them a better life because they have a lot of money. But if they can't get the money to them, then they won't have a better life, and it'll make it much more difficult for them to recruit people. And then we have to recognize, you know, the rules of engagement of this administration are really pretty crazy. Yeah. You know, they have oil, and we need to stop them from being able to use the revenues for that. This administration says if there's an oil truck coming out of there, you can't bomb it because there's a person in it. Well, give me a break. I mean, you can't fight a politically correct war. And even if you do want to be politically correct, just say, if you drive it out of there, we're going to bomb it. Just tell them ahead of time. And then we need to look at, you know, how are they recruiting people over the internet? So we need to be getting out counter messages that tell people that there is an alternative, because basically what we're dealing with is good and evil. And I'll tell you something interesting. When Alexis de Tocqueville came to this nation to look at us in 1831, because the Europeans were so fascinated, how could this fledgling nation, barely 50 years old, be competing with them on every level? And he wanted to see what was actually going on. He looked at many aspects of our nation. But when he finished his big exploration of America, he was so impressed by the ministers, the preachers, and the way that they talked about good and bad. He finally concluded at the end of the 2-volume set, America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. That's what he said. And I believe that the people of America still basically are good people. But what we have done, unfortunately, is we've allowed ourselves to be fooled into selecting the wrong kinds of leaders. And the political class would have you believe that they are the only ones who can solve problems. But they need to go back and investigate, and they will find that this country was designed for the citizen statesman, not for the career politician. And, you know, if my candidacy is successful, it's going to change the whole paradigm for America, because there are a lot of people out there who are not in politics who are really smart people. And all of a sudden they'll be saying, you know, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and we'll have a much bigger pool to choose from than just politicians. That would be a great thing. But you know, the other thing that we really need to be thinking about is how do we make America the kind of place that we all will enjoy more, that our children will be able to enjoy and be proud of. And we have to start thinking about some major issues here. One of the things is that we've become so divided. We've allowed the purveyors of division and hatred to prevail and to convince us that there's a war on women and racial wars and age wars and income wars and religious wars and the war on virtually everything, and that if somebody doesn't agree with you, you should hate them, you should try to destroy them, you should call them all kinds of horrible names. You know, you go on the internet and you look at an article and go to the comment section, you don't get 5 comments down before people are calling each other all kinds of horrible names. Where did that spirit come from? I'll tell you where it did not come from. It did not come from our Judeo-Christian roots. It came from something very different. And we must begin to reject that kind of thinking. And then the other thing is the selfishness. I want mine, I want it now. And that's how we get into this situation where we have an $18.5 trillion national debt. Think about this. In 2001, the GDP to debt ratio was 57%. Today it's 103%. Think about that. The debt is actually greater than the GDP. And most economists will tell you that you get into a real problem when it gets to 90%. We're at 103. We've got to drive it back down. Think about this. Our federal government has 4.1 million federal employees. That is absurd. And 645 federal agencies and sub-agencies. And they are just continuing to grow. And then we create an agency to take care of this problem and another one to take care of the problem that this agency created, and it just keeps going and going, and they ask you to pay for it, and that's a problem. And what we have to do is fix the tax code to have something that is truly fair, flat, and low, so that the economy can grow, because history has told us when we have low taxes, the economy grows. And also we need to get rid of all those regulations, because every single regulation costs us in terms of goods and services. And it tends to hit the middle class and the poor much more heavily than it does the rich. These are things that we're going to have to be thinking about. We need to think about the electric grid, which is not being addressed, and it places us in a very vulnerable position. We need to think about the fact that we're not in space. We have to pay the Russians $77 million every time we want to go up there. And the fact of the matter is, look at all the inventions that came out of the space program. And in the future, he who controls space will control the Earth. We cannot afford to get behind in these things. You know, we have to be looking ahead and planning ahead. But you know, it was Thomas Jefferson who predicted that we would get to this point. He said the people of America would become lax, they wouldn't pay attention, and as a result, the government would grow, expand, infiltrate, and dominate the people. But, he said, before we turned into another form of government, the people of America would recognize what was going on, would awaken, would stand up, and would take America back. I say now is the time to do that.
Are we skipping the video question portion?
Dr. Carson, come back! You got questions!
Thank you, Dr. Carson. I realize the Secret Service has a job to do, and that is their job, and we appreciate them doing it. The first question on the video monitor is from one of your former competitors, Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal.
For our candidates, I know that if we have the right leadership in DC, our best days are still ahead of us. So for our candidates, I've got two questions. My first is this. We all agree that we need to grow the American economy, not the government economy. Specifically, in your first month in office, what 3 specific steps will you take to grow the American economy, not the government economy?
Okay.
My second question.
Good question.
As Republicans, we all agree that we need to get rid of Obama. That's a shocking. But as conservatives, we need to tell the American people what would we do instead of Obama.
Okay, Bob.
So my question to you is, how would you what would you do instead of improving the system? Thank you for fighting for our conservative principles.
Actually, I love Bobby Jindal. We've had a lot of good times at the governor's mansion here. But it is extraordinarily important that we grow the economy, and we have to look at the things that are stifling us. And we have to recognize that in 1776 we declared our independence. Less than 100 years later, America was the #1 economic power in the world. So it's not like we don't know how to do this, to create an environment that encourages entrepreneurial risk-taking and capital investment. Those are the fuels that drive that economic engine. But what stifles it? Regulations. We got regulations over virtually every aspect of our lives. And what I would do is I would examine each one of those regulations and put it through a test, cost versus benefit. And if the benefit does not outweigh the cost, it's gone.
Yeah.
That's what we do. Okay? And then the corporate tax rate. You know, it is the highest in the developed world. And that's easy to fix. Everybody agrees that it's too high, the Democrats and Republicans, but has anybody done anything about it? Of course not. So what I would do, I would provide a 6-month hiatus that money could be repatriated. It's over $2.1 trillion overseas. And the only stipulation would be that 10% of it has to be used in enterprise zones to create jobs for people who are unemployed and on welfare. You want to talk about a stimulus package? That would be the greatest stimulus since FDR's New Deal. And it wouldn't cost the taxpayers 1 penny. You know, that's what we have to do. That's very low-hanging fruit. Those are the kind of things that we have to do. And then the other thing, and I think this is absolutely essential that we do, is we make sure that everybody in the government realizes that we in the government work for the people don't work for us. Putting that kind of atmosphere in place. Now, when I speak to the joint session of Congress, I will make it very clear that in a Carson administration, we will not be signing anything that increases our debt. We simply are going to act like reasonable people who don't spend what they don't have. As simple as that.
I think my mic is off. We have our live question from Iowa Congressman Rod Blum.
Welcome, Dr. Carson, and your lovely wife, Penny. Candy. I have a question from Ken and Dave Brown. They're here in the crowd. Stand up. Yes, they own Modern Piping in Cedar Rapids. They employ 350 people.
Excellent.
Your question, Doctor, is budgets for Iowa families and businesses are not guaranteed based on what we wish they were. They're based on projected incomes and require hard work to make them a reality. But baseline budgeting in Washington, D.C. assumes an increase annually in the government's budget, and handing out anything less than that is considered a cut by some. Do you believe this is a problem? And what would you do to eliminate baseline budgeting at the federal government?
Yes, it is a huge problem, without question. And first of all, I would help the American populace to understand what baseline budgeting is and how it builds in automatically these increases. And then they'll sit there and say to you, you know, I'm going to give you all this extra stuff and we're not really increasing the amount of money that you have to give us. It's all a bunch of lies. But one of the ways to take care of this, I believe, is to take many of these federal programs and return them to the state. And to return to the state as a block grant at 80%. Now, if you do that and you say to the state, if you can administer this program for less than this money, the rest that you save you can use for any purpose you want. That would incentivize incredible efficiency on behalf of the state. And also, the people of the state are going to be watching their state very carefully to see what they're doing with that money so they can reward or punish them based on how they do it. You know, that's the reason that we have the system that we have, because the closer the decisions are made to home, the more likely the people are going to be involved in what's going on. And the people have common sense.
All right, the last and final question, a video question from a large-scale employer and entrepreneur, Andrew Puzzler.
Hi, my name is Andy Puzzler, and I'm the CEO of CPE Restaurants, which you'll know as Carl's Jr. and Hardee's. And my question goes to the economy. With the labor participation rate at lows we haven't seen since the disastrous Carter administration, Americans are asking, what are we going to do to create jobs? But the situation is really even worse for America's youth. We're seeing labor participation rates, that's the number of our young people either working or looking for work, at historic lows that we haven't seen since the Bureau of Labor Statistics began compiling the data back in 1948. So the situation for our youth is bad. We're losing a generation. How would your administration address the problem of creating entry-level jobs so that these young people can get on the ladder of opportunity heading towards careers when businesses are being discouraged from hiring people by things like Obamacare, increases in the minimum wage, and other regulatory burdens that increase the cost of employment? How would your administration encourage businesses to hire those young people?
Okay, very good. Well, for one thing, you know, I was so fortunate as a young person to be able to get jobs. They didn't have to pay me much money, but I learned a lot of skills that were very useful to me later on in life. You know, even, you know, as a laboratory assistant, as a bank teller, as a mailroom clerk, as a garbage collector, as a crane operator, as a car driver. You know, I mean, the jobs just went on and on, but every one of them taught me something. But I don't think I would have gotten any of those jobs if somebody had said they had to pay me $15 an hour. You know, and you can adjust it for the time period. But the fact of the matter is, and when you're a young person and you're entering the job market, what is the most valuable thing? The paycheck or learning how to be a valuable worker? Obviously, you need to become a valuable worker, and that will translate into a bigger paycheck later on. But nobody ever's going to want to pay you if you don't know how to do anything. That doesn't make any sense. So, again, that comes back to common sense. But one of the things I would start thinking about doing is bringing back into our high schools some of the kinds of training that people used to get. You know, when I was in high school, I learned how to make electric motors, and you learn all kinds of practical things. I was talking to an owner of a business not long ago, and he said, we need welders. I can't find any welders. If I get even a novice welder, I'd pay him $80,000 a year. You know, we need to bring back some of these vocational type jobs. You know, plumbing is a great job. We need to teach kids how to be able to do that. And I'm not minimizing, you know, a college education. That's very important. But practical education is good too. I mean, you probably heard about the neurosurgeon who had some plumbing work done at his house. You know, the plumber gave him the bill. He said, $2,700? He said, I don't make that much, and I'm a neurosurgeon. And the plumber said, I didn't make that much when I was a neurosurgeon either. We want to provide people with a broad swath of experiences so that they have multiple options to go into. And let's just talk about education for 1 minute. Education is the great divide in our country. You get a good education, it doesn't matter what your ethnic background is or your economic background is, you write your own ticket. We only have 330 million people in our country. We have to compete against China with over 1 billion, India with over 1 billion, which means we can't waste any of our people. We have to get them all developed. And for every one of those young people that we can keep from going down that pathway of self-destruction, it's one less person that we have to be afraid of or protect our families from, one less person that we have to pay for in the penal system or the welfare system, one more tax-paying, productive member of society who may discover the cure for cancer. And we simply can't afford to throw anybody away, and we need to start thinking collectively. And when we begin to do that, it will make all the difference in the world. Thank you all very much.